long as there's no reservation. Sorry about that, everybody. All right, let me start over. I noticed a bunch of people joined. My name is Stephen Belovarich. I'm a principal software development engineer at Swimlane, where we actually do use web components. We use lit element in parts of our project. And I've been a big proponent of web components now for quite some time. And last year, I released a book with Newline called Fullstack Web Components, where we basically go over the totality of how to develop with custom elements. Today, I'm going to be going over the last chapter of that book. Actually, this is a variation on a theme of the last chapter, because things have changed lately, and some recent developments happened where a technology called Declarative Shadow DOM was released in more browsers, and we got some better tooling to server-side render web components with Express. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We have a Stack Blitz for you, which should be linked in the YouTube Live, where you can follow along with what I'm doing. And in the Stack Blitz, there's a link to a blog post. And in there, in the blog post, you can even copy and paste code snippets here if you want, if you don't want to type them out. Let's get started. I'll give you a brief introduction. So in my opinion, it's never been easier to server-side render a website. Years ago, it took other languages like PHP and Java, and then we got Node.js, and Node.js gave us Express, where we could handle HTTP requests and return HTML to the client, and frameworks took advantage of that. Meta frameworks came out, right, to handle server-side rendering for React and other frameworks and libraries. But as that was happening, standards were developing, and autonomous custom elements came out. We got browser specifications to do component-based development. And one of the specifications that was released a couple years ago is called Declarative Shadow DOM. And Declarative Shadow DOM, basically what it enables us to do is server-side rendering, but it does so by taking some of the logic that we did imperatively before, right? We used to construct a shadow root in the constructor imperatively, like so. We would attach shadow, create a template, set the inner HTML of that template, and then append a clone of that template to the shadow root. And this imperative API became declarative with Declarative Shadow DOM. So with Declarative Shadow DOM, all we have to do to declare a shadow root is to have this app card that we defined here. We defined a tag name app card. We can define that declaratively like any other HTML element. And then we can use a HTML template with the shadow root mode attribute. And what that will do is basically declare the same shadow root, but with this DOM that we have here. It isn't DOM yet. It's just a string, right? We're just declaring a template. But as soon as the browser renders this, it will parse the template here just like it would have with the imperative API here. So we will actually get a shadow root. Anything in the template will still be encapsulated, just like we had with the imperative API. Your styles will still be scoped to this component. And all of the template here. So we have this app card, right, which has some template slots where you can project some content into dynamically. And so anything inside of the template is the shadow root, but then anything outside of the template is like DOM. So you could, even with Declarative Shadow DOM, declaratively project some content into the template here. And so you can see we're going to project an image and an H2 element, as well as a paragraph and a link into the template. So we're going to use Declarative Shadow DOM today here to render all of our components server side. So basically, then what you have to do is if you add a script tag and you still have the imperative implementation here in the browser, you have to basically surround your old imperative logic with a new conditional, because the shadow root will always already be there prior to instantiating this class. So we do a little check here with it to check there is no shadow root, then still use the old imperative API. But in other words, this doesn't need to execute at all if declarative shadow DOM's there. But we also have an opportunity to check if the shadow root is there and hydrate our component with any client-side interactivity or anything that we want to happen on the client that we don't want to happen on the server. Today, when we're coding, we're going to do everything server-side. So with the exception of a short hydration example towards the end. We're going to build this blog out. The blog has 4 components to it. App card, which is this card element, app header, which displays the title of the blog. And then we have 2 routes. We have a main view and a single post view. So when the user clicks this little link here, they can go to a single post view that looks like this. If you're developing in StackBlitz, you'll notice that the local host is running here, but with this gangly looking address. If you run this code locally, it will all run on localhost :4444. Some acceptance criteria: there's just 2 routes that the user can visit, and they're both server-side rendered. We have some boilerplate here just to get us really up and running fast. We have somewhere in this whole equation, we have to declare our routes. We have to have some sort of static definition. Meta frameworks may do this with like the file structure of your project. They may have like a folder where it has the path name and then maybe some syntax there and the way the directories are formatted. But here we're just going to do something a little bit more lo-fi. We're going to have an array with some route configurations. And so routes in this project can have a static path, which is what the root route is using, but then they can also match a path. We have posts, and those posts have slugs, and as long as a route matches this regular expression, it should render the post view. We'll build out the conditional logic that parses these routes in the project. Each component file, each custom element file is going to export a template that is a function that returns an ES2015 template string. What this is going to allow us to do is inject stuff into the template via the arguments of the function. It's a pretty powerful tool that we're going to use here. But we're going to standardize some parts of our custom element files where we'll have a template function, and we'll also have a function that returns some data that should be injected into the view. And we can see that we have some type definitions here in our project for that data model. We have a single post, and we have some site meta. The site meta could be used to display like the title of the page, or maybe some SEO, something for SEO, like you could inject some JSON LD or something in there. So to get started, just open the Stack Blitz or clone the GitHub repo. If you clone the GitHub repo, part of the project is going to use a GitHub API. And I've gone ahead in the Stack Blitz and here in the view post index file, in Stack Blitz, I've given everybody a GitHub token that they can use to do the project. If this token ever gets pushed to GitHub, though, it'll invalidate the token for everyone. So please don't push this content to GitHub. If you're working in the personal access tokens section, just create a token and add it to the file where it's required. There's some information in the README there. All right, let's actually get started. So what we want to do is we want to support Declarative Shadow DOM in our components. And then once we have some basic support for Declarative Shadow DOM in our components, we're then going to build out some Express middleware to render that Declarative Shadow DOM. And so if we go into main view here, which is in packages, client, SRC view main here, or you could, if you're in VS Code or even in Stack Blitz, you should be able to find an index.ts at main. And you get a class called main view, and that extends HTML element. And anybody that's used custom elements, this should be very familiar, right? This is a very basic autonomous custom element. Although we've prepped it a little bit for Declarative Shadow DOM in that we're checking for the shadow root, and if it doesn't exist, we'll add it. This is not what's currently being rendered here in the starter yet. What's being rendered in the browser is here in the SSR middleware file, which is in the server directory, src middleware ssr.ts file. And we have this like render app function here that in our Express middleware, all it's doing right now is calling render app and returning a string that's returned from that function. So the component is being injected here right now. This file is going to get way more sophisticated here in a few minutes, though. We're going to blow all this away and put in some dynamic functions in there that take any template exported from a view file like this or post and renders that for the route. So let's go ahead and start doing that. We're not going to see anything change here in the browser until we code our middleware. But what we're going to do is we're going to just get our files situated. So let me get my stuff set up here. All right, so here we have the main view, and we have our template declared imperatively, like everybody should be used to. But what we can do is we can take this same template that's here and put it in an ES25 template string. And we're going to format this as a function because eventually we're going to inject some data in here, right, and pass that to our view. It's helpful to use tools like tag templates because in your IDE, you can get rich syntax highlighting. That is, if you use a tool, an extension in VS Code, I use a ES6 string HTML, which gives you the syntax highlighting for like all the HTML and CSS in a template string. And the tagged templates help it do that. This is not to be confused with lit HTML's HTML. This is a custom tag function. It's a tag template literal that I'm providing here just for the project. So once we have our shadow template, we can use this in our imperative logic here, just like so. We can replace the inner HTML. This will work. This will just work in the browser. But what it does is, since we're now abstracting our shadow template, we can then reuse it in a declarative shadow DOM template. So here, if I define a new template, I'll call it, let's call this function template. And we can see some differences right off the bat with the template we would have provided imperatively and the declarative shadow DOM template. Basically, declarative shadow DOM encapsulates the template that was imperative, right? Here we're calling the same shadow template function that we're calling to set our inner HTML. But we've encapsulated that with the tag name for the component main view. And we have this HTML template with the attribute shadow root mode set to open. So this is the same thing that we used to do here, right? Where we're attaching shadow and we're setting the mode to open. This is the declarative way to do it though. So we get the same encapsulation, like I said before, but now we just have a string, essentially, that describes our template. And so this is a good way just to reuse your templates, right? So, I mean, we only have to declare our shadow template in one place, and then we can encapsulate it with the declarative shadow DOM template. And your mileage may vary here. We'll see here in a moment. This isn't going to work so well with higher order components like this view. Leaf nodes, you can just directly reuse the shadow template, but things are going to get a lot more dynamic here in Gangly. So the next thing you have to do is export the template, and we'll get back to why we're doing that here in a bit. But when we export the template, we're going to be able to import it in our middleware and use it. Let's move over to the app header, because right now we can't really render our header server side, because all we have is a string like this, and to render our header, it also needs to have a declarative shadow DOM template, right? This app header needs to be encapsulated by, or actually it's shadow root needs to be encapsulated by a template like this. So we're going to go into the component folder here, into the header, and we're going to kind of thread the needle, just like we did before. We're going to create a new function called shadow template that returns the same template that was here before. We're going to call shadow template here, passing in the styles and the title to the function. The style sheet for this component is declared here as another tag template literal, right? And we can pass in our title, and then we can destruct those properties here and use them in our template. And then we'll create a shadow root, declarative shadow DOM template. Here, this time still passing in the styles and the title the same way. But we're encapsulating it again with the name of the tag, the HTML template that shows the shadow root is open. And then we'll update our exports. And then we'll go back to the main view, and we're going to use that declarative shadow DOM template in the app header now in our main view. So we can go ahead and import the styles, the template, the title, and the app header implementation here. But since these names will conflict with names in our file, we can then use as here in TypeScript to change the name to app header styles and app header template. And then in the declarative shadow DOM template here, we can't reuse the shadow template here. Sorry, but for our leaf nodes, like the app header, you can directly reuse it. But we can reuse another function here, which we got from the export from the app header. So we have app header template, and we're going to pass in the styles for the header here as app header styles. And we're going to pass in the title, which is exported from app header. It's actually just a string that's in here called Web Components blog. And then we have one more thing to do before we go to the Express middleware. We're going to go to the second routes view, the single post view, and we're going to declare enough of a shadow DOM template here so that we can just render it. So again, I'm going to take our inner HTML that is declared imperatively, and I'm going to put it in a shadow template. And then I'm going to set the inner HTML of the template down here with the shadow template equals. There we go. So we have the same thing that was there. And then we're going to create a new declarative shadow DOM template. This time we're taking the tag name, post view. We're encapsulating our shadow template with another HTML template tag with the shadow root mode set to open. And then we're going to export that template in this view. All right, that's all the component development we're going to do now. We still can't observe a change. So we're going to now change up our Express middleware to accept these templates and render them based on the route that the user visits. So if I go in here, let's start our journey here at the root of the Node.js Express server. We can see here that our middleware is being imported from the SSR file. And down here, we have two routes declared. Basically, if at every request of the root, we're going to use this Express middleware. And then whenever the user requests a post with a slug, so like the name of the post, here, like this is a slug, this guy right here. That route should then also call our middleware function. Right now, the middleware function is just doing this, like I showed you before. And so we need to instead make it dynamically render all of the declarative shadow DOM templates. So go ahead and remove the script that's in here and save. And once we do that, sorry, let me get this out of the way for a moment. We should get a blank page now. We can inject a little string in here to make sure that everything's happy, like hello world. And we'll see hello world pop up, right? In the background, what's happening is NodeMon is listening for changes, and then there's a live reload server that will render the changes to the browser. Okay, so we're going to get rid of this hello world fairly quickly, but let's go ahead and see what's next. So in our client directory here, we have this routes file. The reason it's in the client is because you could easily take routes like this and build or even use an open source router that's out there and have a single page application. And you could use the same route configuration. Actually, in the book, I show you how to do that in chapter 8, I think. You build, or maybe chapter 9, you build out a router for a client-side SPA. But we're going to use this route config server side, but we have to import it into our Express middleware here. This project is using Lerna and NX. So there's other ways to import that are a lot cleaner, but since this project is working in StackBlitz, I just used these relative paths, which is kind of messy in my opinion, but in Lerna, you could probably do something like call the package name and get the route the other way, or the path rather, for the routes. So you'll notice here that all files that are imported use a JS extension, even though we're working in TypeScript. This is because with ES 2015 modules, Node.js uses this syntax natively, which is what the browser would use as well. Browser specifications, when you import like this, you use the JavaScript extension. So we're going to import our routes because we need to check if a route exists. And if a route exists at the path the user is requesting, then we'll render that route. We have a type definition for the routes here. You can see what it is, and you can see how the routes are defined, right, in this file. So here we have the routes. In our middleware, I'm going to write a small algorithm that loops over the routes because they're an array and calls find. And with find, we can pass in each route that's on this array, right? And check if the path equals the request.original URL. Remember, we're in Express middleware here, so we get an object that represents the HTTP request, and we get an object that represents the HTTP response for this particular route. So on the request, we get this original URL property, and that will give us the full path for the request. And if the path equals the path that's defined on the route equals the original URL, we'll go ahead and return the route. And if it's the root path, we have to have a special condition here to take care of an edge case. So in case the user visits the route without a slash here, we want to make sure if the original URL is just empty string, that it also returns a route. It's basically saying that when the path equals the root, slash should also equal empty string. But then our routes have another property on them we need to take care of, which is path match. So we're going to test the regular expression here for the URL that's being passed into the router. And then once we do that and we hit save, and we go ahead and go to our browser, and we refresh, we can see that requests will return the route, right? So here we can see that a route was matched with the path for the root. We have a component and a tag name that we can reference, and we have the template, right? The template that was exported from this file, this main view file. If you look in the routes, we import both of those templates here, and then attach them to each route. And so every declarative shadow DOM template is just part of the route definition. All right, let's move on. So here in the middleware, we need to handle a use case if the route at this point is undefined, meaning when we called find, it did not find a route. It will return undefined. Then we want to redirect the user to a 404 page. We don't have one. We don't have a component for 404 defined and a declarative shadow DOM, but that could be something you do for extra credit if you want. Go create the 404 route using what you learned today. We're also going to inject another property onto the route from the request object that we got from Express. Because in our single post route, we're going to need to look at the params, meaning the list of parameters that are in the URL. So this post slug will come in as a param on that object called slug, because that's what we defined in the index over here. So we have slug here defined in our Express middleware. On request.params, there'll be request.params.slug on that route. And so we want to attach that to our route because we're going to need that to render things in our view. You'll see more on that a little bit later. All right. So the next bit requires a little bit of Node.js knowledge. But basically, what we need to do is get the path to these files, these bundles. And then we want to get the entire bundle. We don't just want the template at times. We're going to need the entire bundle when we eventually when we want to provide our component for the client to hydrate it. So we're going to get ahead of that problem now. But also what we're going to do is anytime the user requests a route in development, we're going to build the bundle dynamically. And for that, we need a little function that takes any string passed to it, or rather any route passed to it, and returns a string that gives us the path to that component bundle. And if it's in the source directory, meaning client, src, view, and then the component name, go in here and grab the file because we're going to build it. But for production, it's always going to reference dist. And so we're going to, when we call this function, we're always going to pass it a string, src or dist, and then pass in the route. And it will give us back the component bundle for that route. So down here in our middleware, we can use that path. And what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of ESBuild here. And when the environment is development, we're just going to build that bundle. ESBuild is going to do this for us lightning fast. And it's going to bundle everything up for us and give us a bundle that mirrors production, but it's unminified. And then we're going to start figuring out how to render the template. So first we're going to, with a dynamic import, request the bundle in the distribution folder. And you can see when I saved that time, we now have a dist directory. And since I requested the main route that's at this path, the ESBuild just built the production bundle here. But it's unminified, right? It's for development, but it gives us everything we need to start working with it. We're going to then create a new const called compiled template, and we're going to call the template function that's exported from the bundle. You'll notice here that a lot of things are awaited, right? Because we're in Express middleware, we're already in asynchronous function, so we can use await here all day long. But right now our template isn't asynchronous. But we're going to have lots of other processes here that we have to pass the template through that are. And so one of those is sanitization. We need to sanitize the template before we pass it into lit, into the function that is provided by lit to render the declarative shadow DOM view. So I'll go ahead and make a function for that up here. We'll call it sanitize template, and it will take our template as an argument. And then this is an asynchronous operation in itself. And what it will do is it will return a lit HTML template. And then call unsafe HTML. We need to call this for lit prior to rendering the template. It's kind of like the React equivalent, which is like dangerously set inner HTML. We can also provide our own sanitization algorithm here, possibly, to do other things. But it's always a good idea to have sanitization in there. So next, we're going to take our compile template and we're going to sanitize it by calling sanitize template and passing in the compile template. And then we can finally pass in our template to render app, right? Render app it'll give us a couple red squigglies here because right now it doesn't accept of an argument. Let's go ahead and give it the template as an argument. And then try to render the template. So the magic here happens in the render function that's exported from LitLabs SSR, which is this experimental package, but I've been using it in production, very stable for the past year with these declarative Shadow DOM templates. I think there's still some things the Lit team is working on to make it fully compatible with Lit Element. And once they do, they'll promote it out of labs, most likely. But right now, we're going to call render from this package and pass in our template. And when we do that, here, I got too many Chrome windows open. We're going to get something really kind of strange, right? In the DOM, it's going to render object generator. And if we look at the IntelliSense for this, we can see that this method is suitable for streaming the contents of an element, and that the function returns an iterable iterator, which generator is a type of iterable iterator, and that iterator is supposed to iterate over strings. And so basically the render function takes a value of a template, like some string, and then it iterates over those strings. And then it streams them in the output. But it returns a generator. So in order to use a generator in our project, we need to convert this render app to a generator function. And that's really easy to do because all you got to do is add an asterisk. But generators don't immediately return what's in the function body. So generators have to yield each one of the strings. And this is a string. We're expecting to iterate over strings with this render. So we're going to go ahead and convert our function to something like this, where we break up the HTML, or sorry, the document, right, that is in these template strings that are yielded. And then when we hit the generator here, we have to use some special syntax because we're yielding a generator function again. And so then we then yield the final bits of our document here. So let's save after we've supported the generator and see what we get. Oh, so anticlimactic. Okay, so we get a bunch of curly braces. Thanks, Lit. So that's fine because it's not Lit's fault. The hint here is in this method is suitable for streaming the contents of the element. So basically what this generator is now returning is a stream, and we're not handling that stream. So we have to basically pass this result, which is now a stream, and then convert that stream into a string that's UTF-8 encoded, because that's what HTML has to be. You have to encode it as UTF-8. And luckily in Node, we have a bunch of tools to do that. So here's another function we're going to use, an asynchronous function called stream2string. It's going to take the stream that's output from render app and then push chunks of the stream to a buffer here. And so that with this in this for loop, that's what it does. It pushes a bunch of chunks and then converts it to buffer. And then the function's going to concatenate all those chunks into the buffer and then call toString on the buffer, which is really handy because that's what we need. We need a UTF-8 encoded string. But if you thought this was enough, it probably isn't, because we actually need to call this function and not just pass in the stream directly, but we need to use another tool in Node.js that makes all this work. It's called readable, and it's a utility for streaming in Node.js. And we're going to call readable.from and pass in the stream, and then pass that to string. And then so we'll actually use this function in our middleware render stream. So we'll go down here. We'll create a new variable, and we will change what is sent to the client. Remember, we're passing in the stream to render stream, and it's going to give us back a UTF-8 string. And then we pass that into send here, and we refresh our browser, and voila, there we go. We get our Declarative Shadow DOM templates title. And if we go in here, we can look, and we can see what happened. We actually look at the network request, and if we expand here, we can see that we got a body with a template, which this is an artifact from Lit that we can remove later. But here in our app header, we have our Declarative Shadow DOM template. We have the styling, and then we have the H1 populated with the title, right? So this is server-side rendering Declarative Shadow DOM. This is what it looks like. All we have is a title, so let's do something a little bit more fancy. to do that, well, what we want to do is we want to render some cards underneath this. We haven't really touched the card yet. So let's go back to our components and do some development. We're pretty much done with the middleware. We're going to add a little bit in here to handle some asynchronous logic, but this is pretty much all you need to server-side render a declarative Shadow DOM template. The real magic happens here in the render app. And how you prepare that route and prepare the template is kind of up to you, right? That's an opinion. And I'm presenting an opinion here on how to do that. Let's go to our card component. And we still don't have a declarative Shadow DOM template here. So let's take what's in the inner HTML and plop it here in the shadow template, and then make our inner HTML down here equal to the shadow template, and then create a new declarative Shadow DOM template. In here we have our tag name, we have our HTML template with the shadow root set to open, and then we pass in the same shadow template, which is going to get us only so far, because this card, it has a bunch of template slots, and name template slots. So you can dynamically inject things into the header of the card, the content, and the footer. So we're going to change our template here to be way more dynamic. We're not just going to inject styles, not only styles, but we want to inject all the different parts of the card that we expect. We expect there to be some content. We expect there to be a headline, a link in the footer, and a thumbnail set in the card. Our shadow template only needs the styles. We need some styling in here so that our shadow root is encapsulated. And since we're using template slots to dynamically inject content, we can put those in light DOM next to the template. So here in our declarative Shadow DOM template, I'm going to add an image that has this slot set to header, which will then get projected into the header here. And we're going to set the src with the thumbnail here, and the alt with the content. We'll set h2 tag. We'll also plop that in the header, and we'll give it the headline, and so forth and so forth. We have a paragraph where we're projecting into the content slot, and we'll add the content. And then we even have a more dynamic thing here. Let me just make sure I have this whole thing copied right, because it looks like I have a little error here. All right. This is just a link that gets projected into the footer, right? And then we're passing in the link dynamically using ES 2015 template strings. And so this is how we're going to get content into our card. We have to export the template here in the ES 2015 exports. But to get all this content, we need to fetch data from an API. And we're not going to do that here at the component level. We're going to do that at the view level. So back here in main view, we can go ahead and import our card like we did the header, but it's kind of meaningless right now. We don't have any data to really map to it. So let's get the data first. We can, though, just import it here at the top, but we're not going to use it quite yet. We will here in a moment. We're going to add it here to our template. I guess we can do it now, but let's see here. Let's add it. So here, if we have our template and we inject some data into it that we have typed here as data model, right? We expect data from an API to return property, an object with something's not happy with me. Let's not do this quite yet. Yeah, let's wait until we actually get our data coming in. So yeah, we need a, sorry, I'm a little lost. We need a way to fetch the data. All right, here we go. So we're going to add a new paradigm, right? We standardize the way that we export templates. Where is it? Still complaining about, let me build it again. All right. We standardize the way we export our templates, but we need to standardize the way that we also make HTTP requests for the data that's going to be injected into those templates. We need to standardize it because we're eventually going to import this fetch model function into our middleware again. I don't know why we're breaking here. Let's let me try again. Let me try to start and stop my server. It's weird. Client 106. Oh, for some reason here we have the oh, it's just because I got ahead of us here. So here, let me just fix the dist real quick. It hasn't built again yet, so I went a little bit out of turn. All right, there we go. That should work now. Oh, no. Gotta love it, live coding. All right, I'm just gonna keep plowing through this implementation and I think it's gonna fix itself here in a moment. Here in fetch model, we're standardizing this because we're gonna import it into our middleware later and call this function and then pass it to our template. We're not gonna do that here in this file, in other words. What this is doing is making two calls for fetch and calling two local API endpoints and then mapping the responses for those to the data model that we need. And so I'll go ahead and add that function. I'll take our template and I'll update it with the proper data model. And then we have the card imported here. We're going to add the card to the layout. Now we should be up and running. It's still not liking my thing. Why is it? Just want to. Huh. Let's I mean, it's building it. Let me start and stop one more time. Let me blow away the dist. That's still not liking it. I think we'll get it to work here in a moment, though. I'm going to go ahead and import. I imported the card already, right? We have the card template up here. And so I'm going to add that to the template here. See, our server's running. It's still not happy about it. I cannot read. saying it's undefined, but why are we undefined? I guess we could check it here. We could check our JSON responses here. Well, this isn't running yet. That's true. So maybe this function isn't being called. But here, let's go ahead and add it to our middleware. So we'll go here. We'll export everything that needs to be exported. And then in our middleware, I guess that's where it's getting tripped up, is that the HTTP request isn't being set yet. So if we go back to our middleware, if we have a static route, it's not going to have any model. So we don't always want to call fetch model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new variable here called fetch data, and it'll be undefined at times. But we want to check to see if the module coming in has a fetch model export. And if it does, we're going to make fetch data equal to fetch model, and we're going to pass in the route to fetch model. And then we're going to pass that data to our template. And so this should help things. So here we go. Boom. All right. That was what the error was. So the template wasn't getting the data it needed. It was undefined, right? But now that we've called fetch model and passed it to the template, it has the data that it wants, right? And we get a view here that is rendered server side. All of this is server side rendered. We haven't added any scripts yet, right? So none of this is being run on the client. All of it's being run on the server. And if we look even at the performance, if we look at Lighthouse, we should see a pretty decent. We're in development though, so we're not going to get the best score. But in production, see here we got pretty good scores. But once we minify everything like we can for production in this build, we're going to get 100s for performance. But we're already close there with just like a development server, right? So, and we're rendering all this stuff on the server, which is a huge win. All right, so let's finish things up. If we click on one of these posts, we notice that the route changes if we still have the console log running. But we don't have any content in here. So let's go ahead and add some content to the post. So up here, we're going to import the header, just like we did in main view. And then we're going to inject that header into the template. Down in here, we have our shadow DOM, our declarative shadow DOM template. But we can't just reuse the shadow template like we were. We have to declare a whole new template here and reuse the other declarative shadow DOM templates that are there. But we're going to get the same error, right? Because we haven't created our fetch model yet. Because this template is expecting some data coming in from the endpoints, right? It's expecting a title property on the post. It's expecting an author, and it's expecting some HTML, because each one of these blog posts are stored as Markdown, right? And they have a Markdown header, and we need to convert this Markdown to HTML that can be rendered for our page. So we're going to do that with a GitHub API, and that's why we have the API key in here. So if I go ahead and create a fetch model function here, we can see it's pretty much the same. We're going to call the meta endpoint, but this time we're going to get the JSON for a single blog post. And that, what's actually returned is some markdown from that. And there's some markdown on the JSON, and it's in this post object. It's actually on a property on post called content. And then we're going to make another request to an external endpoint this time. We're going to call the GitHub API, and we're going to request that this markdown gets converted to HTML. And once it makes that HTTP request on the server, we can then pass the data returned from that endpoint to an HTML property for our data model. And so once we have all that, we can run our server, and so we're back to this error. Oh, I'm not exporting fetch model. I need to update my exports. Yeah. So let's do that. Let's go down here and update the exports so that we're exporting the template and the fetch model. And boom, there we go. We've server-side rendered a blog post. And by calling the GitHub endpoint, even the little code snippets in here are formatted right. That's why we needed the GitHub endpoint, was for this blog post. And you'll see the GitHub endpoint, what it does is it converts all that markdown to all these HTML tags, which you would then have to go in and use highlight.js to style. And I just didn't do that for this demo, but you could get like some really pretty printed code snippets in here. All right, so that's great. We just server-side rendered our blog, and we did it asynchronously with on the server. None of this code is running on the client yet, and it's all browser specifications, right? I mean, even lit HTML or lit under the hood is using browser specifications. So we did this with just a little bit of library code on the server, but everything we've written for the client is just browser spec. So we're going to just handle a couple other things before I leave you today. We're going to handle SEO, and I'm just going to show you very basically how to handle SEO for these things, because that's one of the main benefits of server-side rendering anything, right? Is you're going to get SEO. And so what we can do is we can, at least for today, render the title tag. And we're going to need to massage the model for this a little bit, because we have on our routes, we don't have a title, but we could easily store all of our SEO stuff on here and inject it into our template. But some of the SEO content is actually coming from here. It's coming from our headers of our markdown, and that's in another HTTP request that's being called with fetch model. So for our purposes, what we can do is we can set the title and the route, and we can see if there's one defined already, like as a fallback, use it. But if there isn't, then use the meta.title for the page. And then we can inject the route into our render app generator. We'll give it a second argument. And here in the title, we can pass in the route.title, just like that. And we can at least now get a title for our page. Super easy. Let's see, what else can we do? All right, so if we want to hydrate our components, we already have a path to do that, right? We have this client path. But what we're doing here on the servers, we're doing a dynamic import, and we're actually importing the bundle. We just need the JavaScript as a string. So we can add another line here to our middleware to read the file at the path, at the same path, and then convert the file to a string. And then we can inject that script here. What that's going to do in our render app is it's going to allow us to inject the script into a tag at the bottom of the page. So here. Now you could set a path and make a network request here, but if we're going to, if we have this power on the server, we can just inline the script, then it saves you a network request. So let's go ahead and do that. And if we look at our elements now, we have a script, which is the bundle that was exported for this view. And still in development mode, mind you. So it's not optimized, but it's there. So what that means for us is we can go into any one of our components, like the app header here, and we can. The app header is here, and it's displaying an H2 or an H1 rather, and we're going to change this so that on the client it's going to append a string to the title, and we can do that here with an else because we have a shadow root, so this else will fire, and we can query for the H1 on the client, and we can get its inner text, and we can set it to a variable here. And then we can set the inner text with that title and hydrate it at the end of it. And if we save and we refresh, boom, we have hydrated our component content client side. Because and you can now instantiate any element, event listeners or something here. Anything you want to do strictly on the client, you can do now. You can hydrate your custom element. And this is going to be really handy for data visualizations or other things you need to do that you can only do on the client, really. So yeah, the only other thing you should know about is some of the magic behind lit HTML happens here in the server. So in the root file of the server, the first code that runs is this install shim on global function. And this is necessary because we need to shim all of the browser specifications we're going to use in Node.js so we can server-side render our functions. And I have a custom shim here, which if you're just using lit element, or maybe even just you're extending your elements just from HTML element, you could get away with calling this function directly from the library, install window on global. But the engineers at Lit were kind enough to allow you to extend the shim. So you can call your own function that calls install window on global, but also passes in any other DOM APIs that you may be using server-side. And this is really necessary if you have, for instance, customized built-in elements in your project, which we go over in my book. We go over a bunch of uses of customized built-in elements. So that brings me to the end of the session today. Just to conclude, basically we server-side render 2 views. We made some asynchronous requests both to local endpoints and to an external API, and we rendered some declarative Shadow DOM templates dynamically. And then one thing I'd like to talk about, just like kind of in closing, is that, for me, I found building this project out to be a lot easier than other server-side rendering techniques. We have meta frameworks that obfuscate a lot and make it really easy to get up and running, but those also bring a lot of overhead with DOM libraries that they're supporting, and by just using browser specifications like this, I find it really freeing. There was a time, like when I started with HTML development, that it felt very egalitarian, and this brings me back to that place where all I'm doing is writing a declarative Shadow DOM template, and I find that just really awesome. I don't know, anybody can write a declarative Shadow DOM template. I mean, if you create patterns like this, you could dynamically do anything server-side. And so I just want to kind of leave you with that. Also, the other thing, which was the goal here, was to kind of show off the power of this. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my server here. And I'm going to show you, I just have another instance of the project running here. I have it built already for production. And if I run this preview script, it's going to build the project for production. And we can see the differences. So here, if we look at the network request for production, super minified. Everything's minified. Since we just used browser spec, I mean, we can use tools that just minify HTML and CSS and JavaScript, of course. And ESBuild is really brilliant at that. But then I brought in some other tools in the project that you can see there in the middleware that minified the styling, for instance. But since everything's like here, we're minimizing our network requests, the biggest performance drain on the page are these big images, right? These need to be optimized. But if we go in here to like a post view, right, and we go into Lighthouse and we analyze the page, let's see what we get. There we go. There's some better performance scores, right? We got 100% performance score with that. And there's some things we need to do to clean up some best practices and maybe like an accessibility issue here. But oh yeah, it's just one little thing we can fix. And we'll have 100 for accessibility as well. So yeah, we're almost there to getting hundreds across the board. And we did that with very minimal effort. And I just think that's awesome. Anyway, so that's it. If you want to learn more about web components, go ahead and take a look at my book, Fullstack Web Components. It's available over at Newline. There's links at the bottom of the blog post. And in the book, we go way beyond declarative Shadow DOM. You'll learn how to create a custom element library, how to develop a small micro library with TypeScript decorators to make component development easier with spec. And you'll learn best practices for maintaining and distributing UI libraries with web components and Storybook. We go over testing. It's really catered towards enterprise web development. You'll learn very enterprisey things like building out entire tables, dialogues with custom elements. And at the end, the third part of the book, we concentrate on coding an application with custom elements. So that's it, everybody. I hope you liked the stream today. I hope you learned a lot, and that's all I got.